This episode of Rooted in Revolution is based on historical records and real people. Some scenes, dialogue, and perspectives are dramatized to bring the past to life, where the historical record is incomplete. While grounded in fact, these interpretations are imaginative and intended to honor the lived experiences of those whose full stories were never recorded.
My days began before sunrise. Water, the bread, heat in the stove. That was the rhythm of Point of Honor when I knew it. But even while my hands worked, my ears stayed sharp. Because in this house, you could learn everything without ever being invited into the conversation. You could stand in a doorway and hear the men speak like the world belonged to them. Not loudly, always. Sometimes power doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it just expects. By the time I lived here, Dr. Cobble was already history. His life already folded into stories other people told. But his name stayed, and it stood like a statement above the town. Not just a residence, a message. A man with a medical degree, a strong name, and the kind of standing that made doors open. And when people spoke of him, they didn't say he lived here. They said it with pride. This was Dr. Cobble's home. Like the house itself should bow its head. And then there was Sarah Winston Cabell. People said her name gentler than they said his. As if she was meant to be remembered as graceful, quiet, beautiful. A wife, a lady of the house. But I always listened for what people didn't say. Because sometimes the most important truths are buried under what sounds polite. And Sarah was buried too. They said there'd been a graveyard here on the property, a family burial place, and that Sarah was buried there. But time does what it does. Land changes. Memory shifts. Now the location is unknown. A woman who lived above the town, laid somewhere in the ground beneath it. And I can't help thinking, even though I wasn't there in the revolutionary years, the revolution lived in conversation. It lived in the way older men bragged, in the way younger men leaned in. I'd hear someone say Patrick Henry, like they were talking about scripture. Somebody would mention Dr. Cabell like a footnote that mattered. That part was always said like it meant something holy. He was close to greatness. But standing in the shadow of greatness doesn't make a person good. Sometimes it just means they had access. They spoke of independence like it was a clean victory, like it settled all questions. But I lived in the leftover truth. Because while some people shouted for freedom, and others were born into a world where freedom wasn't even a rumor. And when I stood in these rooms listening to stories of liberty, I thought about what liberty sounded like to me. Not a speech, not a flag. Liberty sounded like this: a lock turning, a door opening, a name spoken with respect. A life belonging to itself. The Point of Honor saw men build a nation, and it saw them protect their fortunes. It stood over Lynchburg while the town grew, while roads filled with trade, while the river carried wealth like a current, and it held the private conversations no one ever writes down. The kinds of conversations that decide what a town becomes, who gets to rise, and who is forced to hold them up while they do. Some nights when the house is quiet, I imagine the echoes from Cable's time. I imagine Dr. George Cable at a desk, writing, not about medicine, but about power, about Virginia, about influence, about the weight of a name that can travel farther than the body ever will. And I imagine Sarah walking the hall when the house was new, her footsteps light, her world controlled in different ways. And I imagine the truth under it all. A house completed in 1815, standing proud on the hill, while the lies that kept it running stayed unseen. When I stood on that porch, I saw the town spread out below like a living thing. I saw roads that carried men toward opportunity. I saw the river that carried wealth. And I thought of Dr. Cabell, a man remembered for healing. A man remembered for standing beside Patrick Henry at the end. And I thought of Sarah, somewhere in the ground on this property, or once was. And I thought of the people nobody ever names. The ones who carried water, the ones who cleaned blood, the ones who held babies while history marched forward without them. But the full truth of this house is larger than famous names, because every polished surface has a cost. Every grand view has hands behind it, and every story that gets told loudly that has another story underneath it, still waiting to be spoken. My name is Mary Bryce, and even though I was not here in the revolution, I lived inside its aftermath. And I'm still here, telling you what the house remembered